Hello everyone, and thank you again for joining us on another webinar with Sphere Drones. We're just going to wait another minute or so for a couple more people to join us, and we'll be on our way to talk more about how to make the Manual of Standards work for you. So just bear with us one more minute, and yeah, we'll be back online. All right, so I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for another Sphere Drones webinar. I would like to just go through a couple of housekeeping things. And I guess the first thing is on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a questions tab throughout the webinar. I encourage everyone to submit your questions. We will have time in between each topic to go through some of the questions that do come up. So I encourage everyone to do that. Another housekeeping item is we do have polls that do run throughout the webinar. So as we do go through the polls, I'll ask everyone to just please submit them, and we'll action them accordingly. Beautiful. Now to get on with the webinar today, I'd like to first off introduce Jackie. Now, Jackie and I have been associated, you could say, for some time now. We've worked on a number of things together. Jackie's an innovative CEO and founder of Hover UAV, and the Hover UAV's vision is to be a solutions provider in the ever-evolving space of drones. You'll note Jackie's a very large advocate and of drone technology within industry, and I thank Jackie for being with us today. Welcome, Jackie.
Got to find the mute. Hi, thanks, Paris. It's great to be on.
Thank you. And of course, my name is Paris Cockinos. I'm CEO and founder of Sphere Drones. I guess we'll talk through the agenda for today. We're talking flying EVLOS, extended visual line of sight, flying at near controlled airports, flying in no-fly zones of uncontrolled ALAs and HLSs, tethered operations, record keeping for ReOCs, and then, as I said, Q&As. We encourage them throughout the webinar. Now, the webinar will be recorded and will be provided at the end of the webinar today. And if there is anyone that may have missed it, or if you do know of anyone that would be interested in this, feel free to share that across. I guess, as I said, we'll be running a number of polls today. So the first poll for today is, do you hold a current REPL? I'll launch that poll right now. It's just a simple yes, no answer, and we'll go from there. All right, just wait for a couple more people to submit that. And again, last time I'll probably say this, but there's the questions tab on the right-hand side. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar. Alrighty, one more. Fantastic. Now, the next poll is specifically around, have you already updated your operational manuals to reflect MOS? So that's for those that do have REPLs. If you don't have your REPLs, your clear answer is probably no. Fantastic. Now, obviously, these questions are guided so that we can know and assist with our presentation throughout, allow us to guiding whether or not we tailor conversation in certain directions. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, another question, we've got two more polls for today, is what compliance tool do you use? So if we can answer that one today, that'll be fantastic. So the first question is, first First answer is AVCRM, drone logbook, fly freely, drone compiler. We use a manual paper-based system. Okay, just wait for a couple more people to answer. The poll, fantastic. Very much. One of the last ones here is, have you used air data before? Yes, no, I have heard about it, but don't use it. So. Grady. And then the last one, and I promise this is the last one, but how do you currently manage your preventative maintenance? So in-house, being our maintenance controller handles it, third party being you hand it out to someone like Sphere Drones. I don't have a maintenance program in place, or I do not have drones to maintain. So. Fantastic. More people. It's good to see the attendance to our webinars, and we encourage, I guess, on my side, I encourage feedback within these webinars. You know, it's our objective to be a resource within the Australian community for webinars. So again, just a little bit more about Sphere Drones and our capabilities before we get on with today. Obviously, Sphere Drones, our objective as an organisation is to be that end-to-end solution provider within that rapidly evolving drone community. We offer sales, service, i.e. repairs and maintenance, training, consulting, rental support, on-site support, but then also an enterprise agreement that assists with your maintenance of your drone program. Now, our service footprint locally here in Australia is both in Sydney and Perth, and we do have offices in those regions and travel to those other regions. I'll pass over to Jackie now, and we'll get on with our presentation. So over to you, Jackie.
Okay, it's great to be here. So if you can just go to the next slide there, Paris. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Hover to start with. We've been around for about nearly 6 years now, and our main focus is actually helping other operators or other people entering into the market to help them move forward and help them push boundaries. So we assist a lot of companies in writing procedures and complex operations, such as EVLOS, over 400 feet. Lately, and being COVID related, we're doing a lot with remote operation centres as well, so people can start flying from home or flying drones in other parts of the world, but from the comfort of their home or office. Also flying multiple drones at once. And we also do a lot with compliance audits and just trying to help the operators stay current and compliant. So today, obviously the MOS 101 has come out. It's quite a large document, so I'm going to focus most of my talk just for the ReOC holders. So a lot of people ask me, where do they actually find this? Like, how do they know this has come out? So if you want to take a screenshot now, this is where you actually find the Manual of Standards. So you can go into there and you can download a Word document or a PDF document of the whole Manual of Standards.
And this might be something that we do share within the post-webinar email, so I will do that. It's a great idea.
Okay, so the 4 chapters that I find that mostly affect ReOC holders is the chapter 4 and 5. So chapter 5 is the operations beyond visual line of sight, and in the Manual of Standards it's focused on extended visual line of sight. Chapter 4 is operations in controlled airspace and controlled aerodromes. Chapter 9 is operations of RPAs in prescribed areas and non-controlled airports. And chapter 10 is the record keeping for certain RPA. With the current COVID situation, CASA has delayed the introduction to chapter 10, along with some of the other training components as well. So that's been delayed until October 2020. However, the other 3 chapters are currently in effect and came in effect on the 10th of April. So the first one, we're just going to break down, I guess, we're going to do extended visual line of sight, but it falls into the category of beyond visual line of sight. So people often go, how do we know if we need to do extended visual line of sight, beyond visual line of sight? So it's really looking at what the customer actually needs, and then where you go from that. I might just go to the next slide actually, Paris. So we're going to look at mostly extended visual line of sight. We break down extended visual line of sight is like visual line of sight where you can see the aircraft where you are. And then you can break down the extended visual line of sight into two categories. So class 1 is where you have an observer that's right next to you. So class 1 could be good, say if you're doing shark spotting or something along the coast and you need to go that little bit further than visual line of sight. You might need to go out to a kilometre or something like that. So you can have that person standing next to you and communicating to you verbally. And that observer can be using something like binoculars or something like that. Extended visual line of sight class 2 is where the observers are located in different spots. A scenario that may be useful for that is, say, a pipeline inspection. So you could have the pilot, where the pilot's based, and then you could have observers located on different components out along that pipeline as well, so you can get further advancements in that extended. The qualifications that you do need, so the pilot will require a remote pilot's license, and the observer does not need to be an REPL pilot, so you can just train up any observer. I'm going to go through how do you actually get extended visual line of sight, and the most important things is looking at that customer requirements, or also call it the CONOP. So you really want to define why you want to do extended visual line to start with, and then to work out if you need to do class 1 and class 2. Class 1 is a lot easier to get and there's a lot less demand, so it's a great way to start, and then you can sort of move further and further up to class 2. So how you do that is you have to do a draft to all your custom manuals. Now, a lot of people ask me, they're like, well, how do we know what to write into the manuals? So obviously you take advice and start looking at what is written into the Manual of Standards document. And then you really look at it from if you're actually flying. So you want to make it very, very clear to the remote pilot that's flying and what you're going to do when you get there. So the things that I would type into someone's manual, I'd be looking at the procedures. So I'd be looking at the communication methods. So how are you going to communicate? Look, if the person's right next to you, that's fine, that's verbal. But what are you going to do if you've got 5 observers out? How are you going to communicate? You need to provide 2 methods of communication, such as a UHF or a phone. And what happens if those methods fail? And have you got a minimum charge? Like, you're going to have to put that you have to start with 30% radio or phone charge, and do you have signals and things like that. So you would start by writing your procedures, actually how you operate. You also want to look at the crew setup. You want to look at where you locate them. At the moment in the Manual of Standards, it states that we can only go 1,500 meters from that remote pilot. So you're going to want to make sure they have good communication signal. And you also need to keep in mind, in your OEM manuals, they have a maximum distance that drone is actually allowed. Say a lot of the DJI products might be 4 or 5 kilometers. So for EVLOS, you are actually only allowed to go 80% of that OEM distance. So I think it's the Mavic's about, say, 4 kilometers. So then you can work out, well, you might need 2 observers because you have to be, you can't be any further than 1,500 meters apart from each other. You also want to look in your manuals, you'd want to write about communication. So how do you communicate with each other? So what are you going to say if your observer 3 spots a helicopter, or sees something that shouldn't, or sees a hazard entering into that space? So how do you communicate? What do you say to each other? You're also going to want to write about all your pre-flight preps, so the additional items that you need to put in your pre-flight brief, and all your additional pre-flight checks as well. I would probably also add all your normal procedures, so which that was sort of item 1. So what if everything's going right, what is? But you're also going to want to add what if something goes wrong as well, so all your non-normal procedures. In that part of the Manual of Standards, it states that you need a proficiency or reoccurrency check, so you're going to want to add how you're going to manage that and who is going to do those checks. And then probably one of the most important parts is the training. You need to have the training documents in there as well. So you create that internal training. So how are you going to train each remote pilot? So do they understand all the different components and all the different things that they need for those pre-operational briefs, the operation limits, and how they're actually flying in the practical flights. And also you want to see that they know how to train a spotter induction as well, because the remote pilots can actually conduct those spotter inductions. Move this bit. Now, I might just flick back a bit. Sorry, Paris. From there, so after you've completed your manuals and your internal training documents, and look, if you don't, if you're not quite sure what to write, you can like sort of get third-party help with companies like ourselves as well to help write those up. From there, you complete a form. So you complete the 10109 CASA form, and then you'd submit that with your new manuals into CASA. Look, the fee's about $2,880 at the moment. However, I'm seeing a lot of the clients that I'm putting through at the moment getting refunds as well, especially if they've seen those procedures and manuals before. Then from there, CASA will ask for a chief pilot flight test, and they will sign that chief pilot off for EVLOS, and then you'll get an EVLOS instrument added to your ReOC. At the moment, the EVLOS instruments are lasting for the life of your ReOC. So if you've only got 8 months left in your ReOC, it'll last 8 months. But if you look like me, I just reissued ours a few weeks ago, so mine will be valid for 3 years. So the next part, the next chapter in the MOS, we're going to do just really briefly talk about operations near controlled aerodromes. So for so long, we've known if we're going to operate near a controlled aerodrome, we really had to go complete our 1019 and wait about 6 weeks and pay about $800 to get that approval. And often some of our ReOC holders, we're going, oh wow, like in that time, they've just gone to somebody that's done it quite dodgy, so they've lost that job. So there is provisions in this Manual of Standards, which is absolutely awesome for ReOC holders to say at the moment, if say Hover was asked to do a job near Brisbane Airport tomorrow, I could actually do that by completing risk assessments and some of the procedures, and I would not need permission from CASA to do that. Just jump to the next slide. So where that, it might just jump to the next slide actually. I might put in the wrong order. To the next one. All right. So how that's going to work. So for the people that see the screen, anything in the red is obviously the movement and flight areas. So you cannot fly in that area under any circumstances without a CASA permission. However, at the moment in the controlled airports, the items in the like the dark brown, actually I'm going to go back. The only time you can fly in the red area, not back here, is that if you were doing an indoor flight operation. So if you were located and doing a flight right near the airport, but it was in an enclosed warehouse where all the doors and everything were completely closed, that is fine to do that. Now, in the dark brown areas, you now have an option to do tethered operations. So if I was to go fly near the near Brisbane Airport tomorrow, I could do that with tethered operations. So in the dark brown, we can go to 150 feet, and further out in the yellow area, in the approach and departure, the end of that, we can actually go to have a max tether of 3,000 feet. So that's allowing a great opportunity for people wanting to do quick inspections without waiting that 6 weeks approval each time. We're going to go through how to get tethered operations. I'm going to skip through the next slide. So it's very, very similar. Obviously, you've got to know what your requirements are. Like, are you always going to be just doing building inspections or whatever you may need? You still need to adhere to all the other regulations. And then you need to draft amend to your CASA manuals as well. This time looks similar to the EVLOS. You're looking at all the additional equipment you need and how it works. So there are systems already pre-built to tethered operations, or I have seen some people in the past using fishing line, as long as they've got all the different things to stop it and to measure the different locations and the different string lengths, etc. You're also going to want to add how you communicate. So how do you communicate between your tether operator and the remote pilots? And you want to add things about your limitations, so the different effects on the battery, the weather, and the flight paths as well. You're going to want to add all your normal procedures and all your non-normal procedures, and also the training. So the training that the remote pilot will need, and also the training for the tether operator as well. You also do the same. You complete your form. You want a 109 that you want to do tethered operations, and the chief pilot will look at the moment. When we put tethered onto ours, we did have to do a flight test as well. And then you're approved from tethered operations, and then you don't need to go back. That's also for the life of your ReOC as well. So operations in...
There's a question that's just come up. Is there any standards for the tethering equipment out there?
Not that I've seen. However, CASA do put you through a lot of tests to make sure that it's not going to break. You have to sort of put the strain of the equipment. If you're buying like I know Paris they probably have some that they sell as well, that company would provide that. But for us, when we did it early on, we had to like show that it wouldn't break under a certain strength, and that it was definitely secure to the ground as well. So it's what they deem at the moment. But I haven't seen any actual in writing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jackie. You can get on to the next one.
All right. So yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Yep.
So operations in the non-controlled airports for so long, like it's changed, I think, over the few years a few times. But at the moment, we still can't fly over the movement area and the approach and departure. However, in this picture here, we can still fly in that light grey area. If, for example, there's a new term in the Manual of Standards, which we hasn't come up before, it's called a relevant event. And a relevant event is if an aircraft is manoeuvring or flying or taking off or landing or in that location. So if you were to say fly in those grey areas, adhering to that, if there is an aircraft landing, you have to land at the safe time to do so, or to manoeuvre out of that way. If you want to operate at any time, let's click to the next slide, you can also do tethered operations. For me, like usually we just try to tie it in between going up and down, or we look at the traffic so we don't have to tether it and then just fly. But if you do need for certain reasons, or if you're doing surveillance or security or something like that, there are those options for that tethered operation, which you can stay up at all times as well. That's for a non-controlled aerodrome. This one's for a heliport. So this is the one thing that you'd have to actually add to your operations manual as well. It's a little bit different from the CASA standard template that they've got out at the moment. So for a heliport at the moment, definitely their movement area, or their area is about 465 meters across there. And then for the tethered ops, so what they deem as if you'd have to land, if there's a helicopter approaching you, that is 0.75 nautical miles radius, or 1.5 meters diameter. Have you got any questions on either of those two topics before I move on?
There's been conversation. There's been questions surrounding the renewal around ReOCs. So when my ReOC expires, do I have to reapply?
Yeah, if the best thing to do is get your My CASA portal, and then you can do it online. It took me about 3 minutes to renew ours recently. Look, at the moment you're in advantage, so if you've got to renew yours, I think in the next 6 months it's free, and if it's outside that 6 months, it's about $495 to renew that. If you are trying to update your manuals and things as well, sometimes it's actually easier just to renew it online for you and then submit your 1019 or your 1012 or 1014 separately from the renewal process, because it's done instantly. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And I guess another question is around the renewal of EVLOS and tethered operation approvals. I guess they go in accordance with the ReOC, correct?
Yeah, look, because they haven't put any defined guidelines out, I guess because they're only sort of just now issuing those instruments, so they sort of haven't faced the people renewing yet, but they have sort of stated that it is for the life of your ReOC.
And from memory, was it $880 for the application fee to CASA for the tethered operations, roughly? Obviously, that's
yeah, look, for the tethered operations, because it's a flight test, a lot of the complex operations you find they do put an initial fee of about $2,880, but you do get a lot of that back. The tethered operations, look, off the top of my head, I think I paid about half of that. I think it was about $1,280 or something like that.
All right, fantastic. And I'll take one last question here, and it's specifically around the Class C airspace. Is there any sort of less restrictions for sub 2 kilo drones or sub 200 gram drones or sub 250 gram drones?
Yeah, look, I guess the one advantage of the in controlled airspace at the moment, if you do have a very small aircraft or a sub 2 kilo aircraft, you do not need an AROC anymore. So that's one advantage. But no, you still need to adhere to all the other requirements. Look, under the 250 grams, I'm not that familiar. Most ReOC holders we work with actually normally operate with larger aircraft, so I'm not 100% sure on. There are some requirements. There are some difference if you are operating recreational, but because we're talking about ReOC holders, because that's a commercial drone, they still often have to follow those commercial outlines.
All right, thank you very much, Jackie, and we'll probably move on to record keeping. So I'll go next slide for you. Okay, great.
So there's a fair bit of in chapter 10 of the Manual of Standards. There's a fair bit of writing, and a lot of people get confused. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know if we're current now or what we're meant to do." So my advice is to print that section out and to put it in a table like I've done now. Break it into the regulations, but then work out what you need. So not every ReOC holder needs the same records. So, for example, if you're a single person ReOC, you don't actually require the operational release in the new MOS. And also, if you're flying less than 2 kilos, the record keeping also reduces. However, if you do fly EVLOS, you actually get more, so that there's different things in there. So the main components they've put, so I'll go through them in depth. I've got my list of records here. So the first one you can see in the thing, we've got the chief pilot records. So we still, and this is the same as before, we've always had to keep and maintain qualification of each person's and monitor the operational standards and proficiencies, and also complete the up-to-date reference. So that really hasn't changed a lot. Then we need to, I'm going to move forward through to, I've only put a few slides of these ones up, but they've also got the operational release. So in the past, we've often done a pre-flight authorization, so this sort of aligns with that. So you go through and you write, like, what's your nature and purpose of the operation, and the remote pilot station, where it is, where you've taken off, where you've landed, what height you're going to fly at. You need to log the pilot name, the ARN, and anyone else that's involved in the operation. And you also need to log if it's going to be visual line of sight, extended visual line of sight, or beyond visual line of sight as well. And if you have any CASA instruments or anything. it is important that the CIP also does need to keep additional records as well at the moment, which is a little bit different from the past. So any NAPEs or NOTAMs or AIS briefing or any documents that are produced, so if it's a RAF restricted area approval or anything like that, they will still need to be kept as well. We also we have the operational log, which is a lot of duplication from the operational release, and hence why single operators do not need to have it, because obviously they're reporting to themselves, so it doesn't make any sense. For myself, when we put it into ours, it's one combined thing together. From there, we have the remote pilot logs. So similar to what we've been doing in the past, you've got to monitor your flights, where you've taken off from, the date, the time. You've got to keep separated accumulated times if you're doing EVLOS beyond visual line of sight, in some operations, and any simulated times as well if you do simulated activities. Look, some of these can get confusing. I know one of the questions that Paris asked earlier, which I didn't actually see the reply. How many, Paris, were people use electronic systems such as AVCRM?
About half of the audience were using electronic, and the rest using paper-based.
Yeah, okay. Look, we are advantaged. Some of the Australian compliance programs such as AVCRM, it's one that we utilise, has done a lot of this hard work for you. So they've actually started implementing all the Manual of Standards in there so that you can stay compliant. And look, that's something for some of the other operators or some of the overseas, like the Kitty Hawks or the other ones that people are using. That's something, once you've gone through and printed your table and ticked what you actually need, you sort of should send that to them and sort of say, this is what we need to stay compliant. Can you set up templates in that as well? The last section there, or the 10.07, is the RPAS technical log. And I was very stoked. In the early release of the MOS, it was a lot tougher. They sort of put anything over 2 kilos, needed to keep like high level logs such as propeller hours and mode hours. But with the amendment they did in February, they did change that to over 25 kilo, which was a relief to a lot of operators. So during that time, you sort of need to keep, obviously, any maintenance that you've done, any unique markings or any works that you have done as well, and if that's operational. As mentioned, if you are operating in the medium or large category, there is a list of additional requirements that you do need, such as keeping those in-service engines, motors, rotors, and propeller times as well. I think that's most of that. So has anyone got any more questions?
No questions at this stage coming through. I guess on the RPAS side of stuff, did we go through like, I guess, the requirements in terms of the operational log? So we started off with I guess how long it's flown, where it's flown, the purpose of operation, a lot of rinse and repeat from the operational log. But in terms of maintenance, did you have anything to add there?
You have to put, I mean, at the end of the thing, if that aircraft is serviceable as well. So like you're going to need to know that, yeah, that aircraft is serviceable, hence why those logs are out there.
Fantastic. I'll just wait for a couple more questions to come through. So before a operation, questions come through, do you need to say it's operational before the operation? As in a serviceable sign-off?
Yeah.
Correct. There's I guess for us on our end, Jackie, we're done with this section and we'll move on to, I guess, some other questions that are coming through.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
All right, fantastic. So I guess there's another question here that's come through back to the EVLOS approval. So you mentioned a rough fee of, and again, not to hold the audience, not to hold us to these fees, these are just estimations and things that we've been through in the past, but $2,880 for a fee. In what cases did you mention that some of this was refunded?
Well, it's based on their time. Say, look, at the moment, I've just written 8 extended visual line of sight procedures the last few weeks for different operators. So look, CAS has already approved a lot of our templates or a lot of our procedures and how we've written that. So once they've proceeded, they can do a document check. So instead of actually them going to check that every little requirement and training sign-offs and all of that stuff's done, they know that it's already been assigned. So what may have taken them 15 hours or so before may only take them 3 or 4 hours because they've seen similar work. So that's where they're getting a refund.
Fantastic. Is operation duration, is that a requirement now within the MOS?
For flight time?
Yes, correct. Oh, that's what, from what I'm understanding from this question.
Yes.
Yeah. Another question that's come through, and it's relating to a pass mark on REPLs. Is there any further word that you may be aware of that relates to CASA saying, well, you need to pass at a certain percentage? So for those that have been training,
they haven't defined that. Obviously, the REPL, that's a whole other. I mean, we could probably do a 2-day, I think, for any of the training org out there. I'm sure they'll agree that it probably needs to be a 2-day webinar to define all the Manual of Standards training records. However, say relating back to the EVLOS and things like that, I have put. Look, I've done it always at 85%, and look, that's just something when we write it in, and KDRs, like we've sort of done it to try to align it the same as what the REPL training orgs need to do as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And again, as we've said, and thanks for that, Jackie, and as we've said throughout the webinar, we encourage questions now. We're towards the back end of the presentation. Again, we encourage any other questions that anyone may have with regards to this. So I've got a question that just come through, Jackie. Hi, we have a basic ReOC CAS template from about 2 years ago. Do we need to amend it now based on the new MOS, even if we don't fly EVLOS, or can we just keep continuing flying our Mavics and Phantoms?
Yeah, look, I mean, the Manual of Standards has already kicked in many of the like the airspace things. So yes, you should probably update that. However, the regulation would overrun your manual anyway. So you still need to adhere to it, even if it's not written in your manual, you still need to adhere to the regulation, because there is a clause in your manuals that said that whatever is the highest. So that obviously trumps what's in your manuals. However, you should, you will need to update it, especially if you're going to get audited. All of those record keepings, at least you've got till the 10th of October for the record keeping, but all the other stuff should be in your manuals.
Fantastic. And is it necessary to have an ID or serial number on each drone?
It may be in the future when they move to sort of the more LAMP-like systems or registration or all of that items. Look, they do normally like that. However, I got one of my clients approved yesterday and they just hire it. So we literally just put hire and didn't put a serial number, and that got approved. Yeah,
fantastic. Can you operate a ReOC? Can you operate under the sub 2 kilogram excluded category and under an ReOC, so running in both categories?
You can, but usually a lot of organisations that do that, if they want to create their own manual for the excluded category, just do it as an appendix. So CASs still don't audit that component, but you definitely can operate it, and most larger companies do operate as both. But it's best as long as your procedures are really clear. The only thing you can't do is mix the drones unless you have a procedure written into your manual. Because obviously the record keeping requirements are different. So you need to actually have, if you are going to flick, say you're going to operate excluded category on a Phantom one day, and then you're going to operate it under a ReOC because you want to operate in a restricted area the next day, you have to actually you have to maintain the highest level of compliance throughout the operations. However, some organisations I know, they literally just have one drone that's an excluded category and they colour it red, and then the other one's green or something for the ReOC.
Yep, fantastic. Just a question in there. Someone's asking for just some ideas around to some sort of resistance that he's likely to encounter, he or she may likely be encountering. If I've just applied for an area permission to operate within 2.7 nautical mile, well, at 2.7 nautical miles from a controlled aerodrome, what sort of resistance or things are of interest to me in doing?
So they want to fly within 2.7 nautical miles of a controlled airport?
An aerodrome, correct.
You just look, you have to sort of look at your procedures, and as long as you're under the, you just got to look at how your procedures, you need to have all your ReOC and all your radios and all your charts, so you make sure you're not in the approach and departure. And it's mostly, and developing your risk assessment. So breaking down each of those categories in your risk assessment, like how are you going to manage, like what air traffic are you expecting to see, how are you going to manage that? That's sort of mostly all it is, and that's all they look. They look at your risk assessment.
Fantastic. And there's a question around audits of CASA. Is there any sort of indication about how active CASA are in terms of audits? Obviously, there's on the back of this webinar, there might be a few people out there that might be raising a couple of eyebrows saying, hey, I might need to get on top of this. Is there any sort of indication as to how active CASA are in that state?
Look, I've sat through, for some of our clients, I've sat through a few surveillance events, which they call them. They break the surveillance events into two categories, a surveillance event 1 and a 2. And look, at the moment, if something goes wrong, yes, they're probably going to do surveillance. And also, if you start doing complex operations, if you start getting an instrument, EVLOS, BVLOS, over 400 feet, you're more likely to get audited. There was some talk, usually the audit is conducted within 6 months of that instrument to make sure that you are following all those procedures. Look, for general operators, if you're a sole operator, it's probably very unlikely, unless someone's put a complaint in about you or something like that. So it is very unlikely unless something happens.
Alrighty. And I'll probably leave this as the last question for today, unless there was another question that came in. But can the CRP manage the excluded category operations too, or does it have to be a different person? I guess it's specifically a question around an REOC and excluded operation happening within the same organisation.
No, look, they can manage it. And look, I'm happy to touch on, I guess, there's one option out there as well. So yes, they can manage that both, or even if you're in a larger ReOC organisation, there's options for things called deputy chief pilots or senior base pilots and things like that. So that's when the chief pilot can get someone else to assist with the duties, either doing inductions or signing off approvals and things like that. So I actually act as a deputy chief pilot for multiple organisations, and so the people's flight requests will just pop in every day, and then I'll be able to approve that. I'll check their CTAFs and check their operational logs and do all of that for the CRP, as long as that CRP audits that person that's helping them. So you can assign it to someone else, as long as you have in your procedures for the ReOC how you're going to manage and how do you know that that person that's helping you knows all of the stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Jackie, well, I think we'll pull up stumps there for today, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. I think everyone would agree that it's been a very insightful and warming conversation to have, especially seeing as though there's so many questions being raised around the MOS. You know, your knowledge has been absolutely fantastic, and I'm very grateful to having you on board today, Jackie, so thank you very much.
No, that's okay. Yeah, just a reminder to everyone, just print it out, break it down, and just don't get bombarded with a lot of crap that's in there. So as I said, most of it doesn't really evolve around all your operations. So just like cross it off and just focus on the bits, or you know what, just get assistance. If you think, oh wow, I'm actually going to be looking at this and trying to write my EVLOS approvals for a week, it might be better. Look, it might take me 4 hours to write it. So just, you can get someone else to do it, probably works out more cost effective for you.
Yeah, fantastic. And anyone that wants to reach out, feel free to reach out. You can email me, or I can pass on your details to Jackie. Happy to share that information. Now, just a few last things. We've got a couple upcoming webinars. Next Thursday, we've got a webinar on an introduction to Emerson Hovermap, a fantastic Australian product straight out of the CSIRO program. We'll be going through the use cases and applications, and then the following Thursday we're talking about water sampling at depth with drones. So there's been some fantastic case studies on how the team at Sphere Drones has developed a water sampling unit and successfully sampling water for a number of water organisations. So feel free to tune in there. Again, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. Today's recording will be posted and everyone will receive an email. What we will do is we'll collate a bit of information and share it across. I know there's been some fantastic references and links that have been provided throughout this webinar today, and we'll ensure we'll include those. Again, thank you very much, Jackie, and we look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar. So thank you very much, Jackie. Cheers.
No, that's okay.
Cheers. See you guys.